From the Flint Hills Writing Project, this is The Suggestion Box, where teachers get ideas. I'm your host, Andrea Marshbank. Today we have Maret Schrader and Serita Miller, who both taught English last year at a high school setting, and Maret's content is English language arts, while Serita's is English language arts, but also special education. So we're going to talk to both of them about their process of co-teaching, which is something that's very interesting to me because I'm actually going to be co-teaching with Serita next year. So this is kind of this nice legacy moment because we have Maret, who was my mentor teacher, and then Serita, who's going to be my new co-teacher. So yeah, it's going to offer a lot of layers, co-teacherception. Let's go ahead and get started. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Of course, you bet.
All right, so if both of you want to introduce yourself real quick.
My name is Maret, and I just finished up my 8th year as a secondary English teacher.
My name is Serita, and I just finished my 9th year of teaching special education.
Awesome. Well, we're so glad to have you here today. Thank you for being here. At its very basic core, when I think of co-teaching, I don't know that I have the right image in my head because I've only ever been through high school with one class that was strictly co-taught, and it was like a humanities class where we had our history teacher and then we had a history teacher. So it was like both separate sides of it. So in your own terms, what is co-teaching? How is it different from regular teaching?
I think that what my views were and what it really turned out to be were very different from each other. I think when you hear the word co-teaching, you think at its simplest form that there's just two people in the classroom teaching the class. But I don't think what I realized were that there were different forms of co-teaching and benefits to each form depending on what was happening in the classroom.
I would agree. I think it also depends on the two teachers where Maret was able, it was her classroom and she knew the curriculum so she could kind of take charge and take control. But when we would split the class in two, which we found out was very helpful later on, I could piggyback what she did, or we could both teach the same thing at the same time to two smaller groups.
So versus having how many kids were in your class that you co-taught?
So the dynamics of the class really, I think, speak a lot to the effectiveness of the co-teaching, because the class that we taught together, that we were co-teaching together, was an inclusion class. And it's a class that historically, since I've been at the school that I was at, that is a class that I had some sort of support staff in there, usually a paraprofessional in there. All of my years, that hour always had one. And when I got this year's roster, I believe there were 24 in there.
Yeah.
And I believe, if I remember correctly, about 13 of them had an IEP. Mm-hmm. And then the other 11 in there, some had 504s and others were just identified as very at risk. And so it was a very at-risk class. I think in that class we had majority boys. And when I say majority boys, I'm talking maybe 18 boys to 6 girls type of thing. So it was just a very, very busy class. Yeah. So the need for support was going to be evident, just with those logistics. So,
and that makes such a difference. I am the worst person about being in my idealistic little bubble. What do you mean? Having a class of mostly boys is fine. Boys are capable young men.
Yeah.
But it's different.
It's just very different, especially in a subject that's not a very not many boys, their favorite class is English. It's just not. And so then you take that and you couple that with that they're going to struggle in it, that they're low readers, they don't comprehend, they're not good writers. And so here's something that you don't like, and let's, combine that with, test scores show that you're not very good at it and you are old enough that you are well aware of what those test scores are saying about you. So the need for support in that class was very obvious, and it just so happened that this was the first year that the support in that room or in that classroom at that time was a certified SPED teacher.
Had you had experience co-teaching prior to working with Maret in the specific classroom?
I kind of co-taught in a middle school one year. We had a guided studies class where that's the hour I would see my caseload of kids, and I combined it with another teacher who had kids who were struggling with reading and writing. So we kind of teamed up and it was kind of co-teaching. We kind of took turns doing lessons, and we'd focus, half time was on homework help, half time was on intervention lessons. So it just looked different than what we did.
So if alternating lessons looks different than how you and Maret co-taught, so what would like a day, or maybe even multiple days, maybe one day isn't a good snapshot, what would like multiple days of co-teaching look like in your classroom for the specific hour that we talked about as high needs, right? They're bonded over this idea of like, we don't like English, and that's a strong bond. That's hard to break. Yeah. So you were kind of combating all of that. So what did that look like?
I was a blended learning classroom this year as well. And so I was a blended learning classroom this year, which just meant that my approach to instruction and just my approach to classroom management was a little bit different. And so there was a whole lot more group work. There was more up and moving. We did stations, things like that. That allowed for a lot more opportunities for us to try out the different co-teaching strategies, as there were a few that we really focused on. So maybe this would be a good time to talk about some of the different ways in which we did, those strategies. One of them was where we would split the class in half. And this was always done very strategically. I will take that back. Not always. Sometimes it was random. Sometimes we would have them, we would do fun things where we'd have all 24 of them, line up in order of their birthdays, and then we would just pair them off.
Yeah.
Or one thing that we used to do was we would have them line up by height, and then we would pair them off from the ends. But what would just naturally happen is it would split our boys up.
Yes.
Because our boys would usually be to the further, the taller side, while our girls were over here. So it kind of broke up those boy things. But there were times that we knew that so-and-so couldn't be with so-and-so, and so we needed to divide them up. Sometimes I would just do that on my own and then just tell Serita, hey, heads up, this is what we're doing, which, by the way, she was always fantastic about. And an aside, I knew that I was going to have Serita in my class in May before summer break. And when I found out that I was going to have a certified SPED person in there, I was super pumped because I thought, oh my gosh, we're totally going to co-teach this class, which, an aside, I do not believe that you have to have a certified teacher to co-teach with you.
No.
I think if you just have a paraprofessional in your room, I think that it's very possible to co-teach with that individual. But coming back.
You knew in May.
New in May, thank you.
Yes.
So new in May, and I thought, I am totally going to co-teach with this person. But I didn't reach out to her, and I didn't say anything. I don't know if I met her first or if somebody else met her first, but I found out that she wasn't weird, and that I would, that I could possibly work closely with this person. And so what I'm trying to say is I think that personalities are a very big element. And that is why I don't think that this is for everyone. Everybody who has some sort of support person in their classroom, I don't necessarily think that you should always be like, we're going to co-teach together, because if your philosophies don't align, if your personalities don't align, it's just not going to work.
It means a shared value system.
Exactly, yeah.
Gotcha.
And I think that, we always strive to do what's best for kids, and sometimes two personalities are what's best for kids, especially in our case, but sometimes those personalities aren't what's best for kids. I look at the support staff that I've had in my room over the last few years, which has been a lot of great paras, but I couldn't have co-taught with all of them just because of the way that we the way our brains worked. So
And like the expectations even coming into that.
yes, and the way, I mean, even down to like classroom management techniques. Like we had to have pretty similar classroom management techniques as well, just because the kids needed that, that continuity
Right.
in that 90 minutes. So.
Makes me think like one of them would come up to you and be like, but Mrs. Miller said.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
You don't want to go there, right?
Yeah. And we did have some students that I can think of one individual in particular that, like, there were kids that I just didn't jive with. I just didn't. But she did. And so it just worked. I mean, it was basically parenting
Right.
at its finest.
Yeah.
I mean, the days that I needed to tap out on a certain kid, like because they were driving me bonkers, like Serita stepped in and I could tell when she, needed to tap out with certain kids, and I would make sure they were in my group that day. So,
Yeah. And the nice back and forth.
yes.
So kind of rolling back just a little bit, the timeline. So Serita, when you saw that you were going to be in an English classroom with another teacher, what was your immediate thought? Like, we're going to co-teach, or like, what was your starting
Yeah,
point?
like if ever I'm placed in an inclusion class, like, I mean, that would be like the ultimate goal, it's hard not to kind of feel like a para sometimes when you're just in the back of the room and floating around and, not doing a lot. But yeah, and you have to kind of feel each other out at first to see if it will work, I think.
And after I remember those first few days of school, just getting my hiney kicked 7th hour before we really had it figured out, and just thinking like, I can't do this the rest of the year. Like, they are out of control. And so just knowing that, like, we had to make this work because it was going to be a long 180 days if we didn't.
I remember the first day we decided to split the class. It was like,
it was magical.
my gosh, why didn't we do this sooner?
Yeah.
'Cause it was just, easier to manage, and I don't think some of the kids were as intimidated being around other kids,
And there wasn't a big enough audience for some to perform for others, and we split some of those personalities up, and it just worked really well.
So rather than co-teaching being kind of like an initiative coming from like kind of top down, like admin being like, you have to do this because we've heard it's great, it was kind of born of this problem solving, of this necessity.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that made it more beneficial to you because of that? Because it was kind of born of your own, like, hey, why don't we do this so that I can maintain sanity?
yeah.
My sister-in-law teaches in Washington, D.C., and she teaches math at a middle school. And all of her classes that she teaches are co-taught with 2 certified teachers. And so I would always hear her stories of what co-teaching looked like. And just, I was always fascinated by, the work that you can get done with kids and the way you can group kids and take kids, things like that. So that's kind of where maybe the seed got planted a little bit. But it was just nice to have another person in the room that also wasn't just for my special education students. Sometimes those special education students needed that one-on-one, but I could do that one-on-one with them while Serita stayed in the room with the other kids. So
Yeah, giving like a mix of personalities.
yes.
I do think that sometimes we get, and there's not a real way to fix this, but there are students who, like you said, like sometimes personality rifts, like we just don't jive with them. And so maybe offering like, okay, like we have some sort of like a variety, not only for you, but also for the students to give up some of the, like they still have like an authority figure in the room where they're like, yeah, like I still like this person. Like I haven't, either intentionally or not intentionally, like burned all bridges with this person.
Yeah.
So you talked about the seed being born of like you were familiar with co-teaching because your sister-in-law in DC did it. And actually sounds like that's maybe like almost the opposite scenario. Like that sounds like every class is co-taught there. So,
Yes.
Okay, so maybe co-teaching is effective outside of the like born between the ideas out of like necessity, like we talked about. But beyond that, did you have any other influences? So you had this scenario that was really tough and you needed to deal with it, and you saw each other's resources and you were ready to build. But did you attend any like conferences? Did you have any other like, were there any texts that helped you out? Were there any specific ways, like other teachers that came to you and were like, hey, I see you're doing this, how can we help?
I think you were the one that found,
Yeah, there was a 2-day conference about differentiated instruction. Is it Robert Villa? Was that his name? I think. And he also does stuff on co-teaching as well. So it was kind of embedded in the differentiated instruction training. But we both went and we learned a lot in how we should learn more about our students before we start doing certain things. He does a lot on universal design learning, and there was a piece that we took back was, if you have a kid that's struggling, you have to find out why, and especially if it's only in your classroom. So what are the struggles, and then how can you fix that, and how could you tie that in, to the rest of your class? So Maret made a survey. We had them do a survey, and it kind of pulled out interests and needs, and we looked at that. We didn't do a lot with it, but it was like middle of the year. So I think if we could go back and do more of that at the beginning of the year, then that might have taken us a different path. And I think we kind of learned more about each other at the training as well, like what we both bring and how we could use that in the classroom.
Did you feel like going to this training on co-teaching with Robert Villa, do you think that you would have been able to co-teach without having that training? Like you would have kind of figured it out and bumbled along, or do you feel like that was like absolutely like people need to be trained on this?
I think we would have, in a way, figured it out. I think that one big thing that I got from that conference was putting like a label and a word to the different like styles and formats, the way that we would do the class. Like, I think I started this earlier, sometimes we would split the class in two and teach the exact same thing at the exact same time. So Serita would go over to another classroom if we were teaching plot elements. She would take half the class, I would take half the class, and we would both be teaching plot elements. Sometimes it was more of that lead teacher up there delivering instruction while the other one just kind of roamed around, checked in with our kids that we knew needed checked in on. Sometimes we were station leaders, so if we were going to station the classroom that day, sometimes one of us was going to be at a station, or maybe we were both at a station that was more teacher-led, so kids got that, teacher direct instruction. Sometimes we just went back and forth. Like, we had 5 things that we needed to cover that day, and so we just alternated back and forth. The kids really got to the point, I think at the beginning they weren't really sure what was going on, but they got to the point that they knew that it was both of our classrooms. Like, there were students, a big win for me that I knew like it was working and it was good was when at the end of the year we had a kid in our class who he was super low, but one of the hardest workers I've ever had, and he went to Serita for help during seminar. Like, I didn't tell him to do that. I don't even think she said, hey, you can come see me. He just knew, like, that's Schrader and Miller's classroom, and I can go see either one of them because they're doing the same thing. So it just, like, that was a big, like, oh my gosh, this is actually working. Like, the kids actually understand what's going on right now. So, but as far as, like, formal training, I mean, I'm sure that the more training you have, the better you'll be at it. But I think for those starting off who just want to do it, that, what's better than one good teacher? Well, 2 good teachers. Like, why not? So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that there are some teachers out there who maybe would feel a little bit of anxiety with like giving up. I don't want to call it ownership of the room, but I think it is in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Like, right? Like, especially, and maybe I think we might be better about this, teachers who teach like elementary school or middle school, but as all of us here at the table are high school teachers, like my classroom is very much like it's a my space. It's like a very large office filled with 20 to 30 kiddos. So did either of you ever feel like there was like some nervousness about the ownership of what was happening, or did you ever did that like just not become an issue at all?
I never felt that way. I guess like coming in as a special education teacher, like that's always in the back of my mind to co-teach, and so I don't know. I never felt that way before. But I also I don't want to teachers work really hard to get their own classroom and to do things the way they want to do it. So you don't want to like step on their toes either. So I think that goes back to finding like a person that you really mesh with.
Yeah. Did you ever get to a point where you felt like you could pretty comfortably step on Maret's toes and be like, that's a dumb idea, Maret?
She always had really great ideas.
Yeah, but like Maret weren't here right now.
No, I don't think so. And like I like the blended learning piece too. So it just, and the projects that were done, that was never an issue. And there were a couple times where, she'd ask my input, hey, what's like an easier passage for them to read and understand? And, I could give my input. I think the one thing is we never really planned together just because of scheduling. We only had one common plan time, but I was supposed to meet with special ed people and she met with ELA people. So I don't know. If I could go back, maybe just like trying to find an extra 20 minutes, to say, this is what's on tap for the week.
Yeah.
Because I would always feel bad when she'd email me like 15 minutes before class, hey, this is what we're doing. I'm like, oh, yeah.
Oh, you felt bad. I constantly lived in fear that she was thinking, what a bossy girl. Because that is a lot of times how it would work, that it would be 5th hour and I'd be doing like my internal cheer of trying to get pumped up for 7th hour because you basically had to do that before that hour every single time because it was so hard. And then, you'd have your, okay, this is what we have to get accomplished today. And then I would always think, okay, how can I put the blended learning spin on it? And then the next was, okay, so how can I put the co-teacher spin on this? And so after a while, it just became a lot easier. Well, like, oh, okay, so we'll split the class, or, oh, okay, we'll have her do a station or whatever. But I constantly lived, not constantly, by 2nd semester, I realized that it was going to be okay, but I was always trying to be as aware as possible of making sure that I wasn't bossy. Like, this is what we're going to do. And but still knowing that the curriculum was already there and the lessons were already there. So it's like, well, if it's there and I know that it's good, then, we don't necessarily need to change it. But I did use her, her special education knowledge on a lot of things because that is one of my areas of weaknesses. And so, I needed kids to read a text that they got to choose, and she was a good resource to go to and say, hey, can you give me 5 texts of lower reading levels? So, but you just want to be nice. You just want to be nice, and you don't ever want to hurt anybody's feelings. And so, like, there's just a lot of tiptoeing. But after a while, when things are getting busy and you've got 50 balls up in the air, it's like you have to learn. She doesn't think I'm bossy, like, and if she does, I hope she says something.
Right. It's like the personality aspect that you said before.
Yes, exactly. And you're going to learn that early on. And I think that might even have been a conversation that we had at one point where I hope you don't ever feel like I'm telling you what to do. And I hope you feel the autonomy of when, you have them and I need you to teach plot elements or whatever, that you feel the autonomy to do that however you want to do that. So
I like from this conversation, this is all incredibly positive and inspiring, but I could totally see how, like, if you had somebody who, like, in this particular scenario, Serita, I know you didn't feel like Maret was bossy, and Maret, I know you didn't feel like Serita, like you felt like really enmeshed with each other, but it would be like pretty stressful if you had a scenario with somebody who that didn't work out with.
Yeah. So I think that honesty has to be a very big part of the conversation at all times, and just, doing what you're comfortable with. And so, because co-teaching is you're stepping outside of your comfort zone. Just doing that in itself, let alone everything that goes with it. So
what if they taught co-teaching in college? What if that was like a course in School of Education?
Yeah.
It should be. There's a lot of research out there saying special ed kids do better in inclusion classes. So I don't know. Maybe someday we'll get there.
I'm sure that there's a lot of, like, because, effectively you're having 2 fully paid teachers in there. And I'm sure that there's a lot of administrators out there that would be incredibly supportive, if not for the budgeting scenario of that.
Right.
And as I did it this year with our inclusion class, I often thought of my honors class. Like, what would this look like if I could co-teach this class? And I mean, they were brilliant this year. I probably had one of my highest honors classes that I've ever had. I mean, they were so smart. And so I often thought, you know, what would it look like if there were two? I mean, essentially that's what it is. There's two of you. I mean, isn't that what we always say? Man, I wish I could, you know, copy and paste myself.
Yeah.
That's what I did.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful. So I don't think it's just for an inclusion class either.
Yeah.
I think that you can really take it. And then another dream of mine would be, before last year, my history teacher on my team and I always talked that we wanted to co-teach history and English, that it would be one class and we would bring in literature, you know, historical fiction, and anyways, just teach it cross-curricular, co-teach cross-curricular, which I think has a lot of possibilities too.
Yeah. And like for the functionality of it, like cross curriculum is it's one of those buzzwords that makes us all in the education world very happy.
Yes.
And very like it's very easy to convince those around you to be on board with cross curriculum. So maybe if you're out there and you're a listener who doesn't have maybe access to having another professional in the room at the same time as you, maybe reach out to people in rooms near you or in people grade levels similar to you and see what can happen there. Yeah. So I'm going to take this a different direction for a second. And this is not intended to be anti-co-teaching, but do you think that if you had smaller class sizes to begin with, that there would have been a lot of the issues that you would, because yours was born out of issues and necessity, which isn't to say like there are benefits of co-teaching even in like the perfect classroom, right? But do you feel like smaller class sizes would have helped out in that? No?
Because
I'm excited.
I had a class for the first year this year of 10 kids total. 10 of them. My 8th hour had 10 kids.
Yeah.
And it was awful.
Oh no.
It was bad.
That's so surprising.
Yes,
That's always
because,
like the thing we preach.
Yes. I think that I realized this year that it is possible to have too few kids, because classroom discussions were like non-existent.
Why are you laughing, Serita?
Well, because for the resource English classes that I had, second semester I had a class of 6 and a class of 7.
What?
And so it's like,
Speak.
yes, and like
Say something.
you ask a question and it's just crickets, you know. So just having, and it's natural, like you're teaching and you ask questions. It's just, you know, naturally kind of how it flows. And oh man,
we had better classroom discussions when all 24 of them were in there than I would have with my class of 10. It was so rough. I've never experienced anything like it. It was crazy.
Yeah. Man.
And then when kids were absent and I would have like 8, it's like, what are we doing here? Like, why are we? Yeah.
Oh man, that's so
rough.
Interesting. You got me all nervous now because the class Serita and I are about to teach is like it's a reading strategies class and it's real small. So, wow.
But I think that for like when we would split the class and have like 12, I don't know. I don't know how much discussion, now that I'm thinking back, I don't know how much we ever did discussion. I mean, it was more like part of the blended learning where they would have to go view a lesson and take notes. It was more for classroom management purposes than it was for like facilitating discussions. Because if we were going to do discussions, we usually did them whole group. And I'm wondering if that was also just that control piece of me that I mean, I wanted to know if we were going to discuss something, I wanted to know what everybody was talking about and what they got out of it maybe. So
I think that's also just maybe like a really informal assessment. It's like you just want to know where they're at.
Yeah.
That's really intriguing. Because I think that like you so often hear before you hear anybody say, wow, I wish I had another teacher in my room, they'll say, wow, I wish I had less kids in my room.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting topic as class sizes. I think that's everybody's quick fix, but I think it's a be careful what you wish for, because
I think so too, because like we had even talked, we had a couple girl students in 7th hour who were high achieving.
Should have been honors. I mean, test score wise, they could have been honors.
Yeah, and we had even talked about, hey, maybe they could, peer tutor a group sometime. And, so there's always that option. I think it's
and we did strategically group them a lot of times with some of our kids who needed that positive role model, or needed that mature girl in the group that they wouldn't act as goofy for. So
I've been thinking a lot about grouping lately because I've been going through some professional development training for project-based learning with Ginger Lumen. So for those of you who are listening in Kansas, Ginger Lumen is a big name. And if you're not listening in Kansas, you should still go look her up. She's got her own website and a whole bunch of cool stuff. But she talks a lot about grouping. And I think that I know my personal failure as a teacher is that like I'll have an idea, like you go into the class and you get a thought of like, oh, we could do this in groups and it would be way better. And sometimes I'll like hesitate and I'll be like, all right, we're gonna get into groups, and I'll pause. Right, and the kids like it's like they're predators. They're like, she doesn't know how to group us. Everybody just go stand next to your friends. Go. And like it's really hard for me not to be like, no. I know you all just stood up and moved a lot, but we're all gonna line up on the side and do names and stuff like that. But one thing that Ginger talked about was that like grouping you can do it like lots of ways, right? Like I think Maret, I think you and I might have talked about this, how like there's like 5 basic interests, right?
We did that a lot of times.
Yeah.
It's like sports, food, computers, things like that, and then you just group them all.
You group them based off the interest, and then they've got like this common shared value, right? This bond that they can form. You could also group them. You talked a little bit about like grouping them based off of personalities, right? Like separating those people that kind of like started each other's fires, as it were. And do you feel like if you ever grouped based on capability, right? So you talked about having the students who were very high achievers maybe like help out with the teaching part, right? Because we learn it best when we've taught it. Do you feel like your students were aware, or like, and I'm kind of leading into like, do you feel like your students were maybe a little insulted at any point sometimes if you ever grouped them by like ability level, or were you frank with them? Like, did that ever kind of cause any tension?
I could see that becoming an issue like in other classes that I taught, but because there were so many of them, I mean, they were definitely my lowest class, whether they were identified as special education or just low or at risk. No, and if they did, I didn't pick up on it, which I usually can see that like in their faces and stuff, but no. I mean, as a teacher, you always have the dreaded question of how are you going to tell the students who need to be pulled out or are going to take an alternate assessment, like without singling them out or, making them feel like they're being pointed out or things like that. That's something that I have always struggled with. But, so many of them struggled that it just wasn't an issue. And we had created a culture in that hour, that 7th hour. I mean, we really had, we were a family in there, and I think that we went through a lot together, and, we went through bad sub notes together that, it was the whole class. I'd have sub days where it was like, everything was great. And then it got to 7th hour. They were a little busy, you think? So, but a lot of kids in that class also got modified assessments, even if they weren't identified, just because that's what they needed. So there was.
Yeah, I think speaking to that culture of the classroom, that especially with the classroom who it started off to be such a problematic scenario, and out of that, over by the end, it developed into something that was like a family. And you've talked about like the metaphor of both of you being parents, right? So do you think that overall, like when you ended that class versus when you started with that class, like so from August to May, did you have like a feeling that was positive by the end of it, or was it still like more relief for both of you? Did you feel like you had created something good that was, like obviously you did, but I'm kind of curious about like your personal feelings. Did it feel better because you co-taught?
For me, it did. I felt like by the end of the year, any one of those students in that hour could have come to either one of us, as their teacher and gotten help or, whatever they needed. For me personally, I felt like I was doing more of what I wanted as a teacher. As one of my goals was to co-teach, and I got to. So that that was great. So I definitely felt that it ended positively.
I didn't dread it.
Yeah.
By the end of the year, I would say at the beginning of the year, that hour, it was the last hour of the day. I had planned right before that, so I had a nice break, and then it was like, oh my gosh. I have to. And I always say that 7th hour on a Friday.
Yeah, that was rough.
It's always rough. I mean, that is seriously, if you can survive 7th hour on a Friday, like you win.
Yeah.
But it's rough. Like they're tired, I'm tired, we're all done. And so to do some really hard things some days, I mean, it took every one of us. And there were a lot of days that we would stand in front before we would get started and say, I know you're tired, I'm tired, but what we are doing today is important and we have to get through it. So
yeah. And I think that there's a lot of power in what you said of like no longer dreading it, because I think for a lot of teachers, and myself included, we've fallen into the trap of like, okay, this is the class that we're not as fond of, right? And like that feeling can be as extreme or as limited, but we always have a class that we like more, and we always have a class that we like less, and it tends to exponentially increase in either direction. And I know that for my math people out there, that's not the right way to say that, but if you were here, you'd see my arms going the direction, you get it. But like, you know, you tend to like the class that you've liked more and more and more and more, and you tend to like the class that you started off not loving less and less and less.
do you think kids will listen to this?
I don't know.
Because 7th hour was my favorite.
Was it?
Yeah. There were personalities in there that made me laugh.
Yeah.
Like as a person, like not Mr. Schrader, but like Maret. Like they were funny.
Yeah.
And they were hard. Oh my gosh. I mean,
we had
it was rough,
a lot
but
of moments of eye contact and giggling. It was like, oh my gosh, what's happening? But
yeah, but they were, I mean, yeah, they will go down as one of my favorite, one of my favorite classes.
Yeah.
One of my biggest classes ever too.
Yeah, it was big.
Yeah. The students that are good people, not great students.
Yes. Yep.
That's true.
Yep. Very true. But like parent-teacher conferences sometimes, and I tried not to do this after a while, but we would start and I'd be like, well, they're in my 7th hour. And as if the parents had any idea, but I'm sure like the tone of my voice was hopefully like an indication of what that meant. But I felt bad for the kids who just kind of sat back like shell-shocked, like what is happening in front of me, like how did I get put in here? But,
well, to jump off of parents real quick, did you have any parents who cared that you were co-teaching, who noticed, dare I say, or had any like comments?
Serita came in during parent-teacher conferences for any of our 7th hour parent-teacher conferences. I also got in the habit that if a 7th hour parent emailed me about something, I would CC her on my reply and then just say, like, just FYI, Miss Miller has been CC'd because she is co-teaching in that hour. But, you know, I just think no matter what, by the secondary level, I think parents are just kind of like, I think they get it, especially if they've had kids go through, like they're like, yeah, you're doing great, and they don't really, it's not that they don't care, but they just, I think it's more of a trust, like they just trust whatever you're doing is good for their kid. And, you know, I try to tell parents as much as possible how much I love their kid, and I think that they just, they trust me. So I don't know if we ever sent home like attention, we will be co-teaching this year, but you could. I think that's a great idea because it's an interesting concept. But
so I'm sure we have teachers out there who are at least like piqued their interest on co-teaching. And so if you had any overarching tips to give them about co-teaching, like things that either you wish you would have known or things that like traits that you feel like you have to take on in order for this to be successful, like what advice would you give those listeners out there?
You have to be flexible. You know, whether it's within the classroom, spur of the moment, you know, finding out, oh, we're going to do this today instead of this. You just have to be. And I'm super laid back, so it's easy for me to say that. But I think in order for it to really work and for kids to benefit from it, you got to be flexible in what you do.
And I would say maybe I'm not so laid back. And so my version of flexible would be you have to be willing to give up some control. Because I was very in control of my domain, the way I taught, how I taught, what I taught. And so to have somebody else come in that was going to teach maybe not like me or handle discipline maybe not like me, that you just have to give up that control. I mean, back to that parent analogy, I do think there were times that Serita and I were like good cop, bad cop. Like you have the parent that you're going to tell you messed up to first, and then you have the parent who you know is going to drop the hammer. Like if a kid forgot to do their homework, they told Serita.
Yeah, totally.
Like because they knew the other parent was going to drop the hammer. And I think that that's also a good piece of advice, is that your personalities, you can't like try to morph into each other. Like you have to have, if you have those different personalities, it's almost better that way, just because kids react differently to those personalities, and that's just what's good for kids. So.
Right. It's less about like trying to like mix the colors of you are and make like a new color.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
More about mosaicing.
Yes.
Is that a word?
I don't know. You should ask an English teacher.
Oh, we should.
Okay, Google. And have fun. Like,
Yeah, definitely.
because it's something new and exciting, and it's an experiment. Teaching is a constant experiment. Every single day you have how you think it's going to go, and sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, and that's just how you have to approach this as well. So
Thank you so much, Maret and Serita, for being here today. I'm really intrigued by the idea of co-teaching and feel much more prepared to actually co-teach with Serita next year. I feel like I have like the in on all the things she needs from me. I'm like, all right, so don't send emails 15 minutes before the class period.
No. If you do, it will be fine. It will be fine.
yeah, good luck with that. That's a great goal, but good luck with that.
Nah, it'll be 10 minutes before it starts.
Or sometimes it says she's walking in the door.
Yeah.
I mean,
Good thing we had channel one time.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So thank you both for being here. This was absolutely a pleasure. I feel like I learned so much. Hopefully our listeners out there did too.
Yeah, definitely. I hope that more people are interested in taking it on and experimenting with it, and just, remembering that we always want to do what's best for kids, and 2 teachers is better than 1.
Yeah, this was great. Don't be afraid to go outside of your comfort bubble and try something new.
Thank you so much out there for everybody who listened. We really appreciate it. If you like the suggestion box, this episode or any episodes that you've heard before, if you're just into the idea of teachers teaching other teachers, please make sure to subscribe, leave a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. We're available on SoundCloud and Google Play and also YouTube. And yeah, make sure to check out our website, thesuggestionboxpodcast.com. If you have any great suggestions for strategies or lesson plans or units or anything that you feel like other teachers really need to know about this great idea, I have to spread the word, please send us an email at thesuggestionboxpodcast@gmail.com. We are absolutely looking forward to hearing from you. Again, thank you so much, listeners. Special thank you to Dr. Heather and Dr. Roger Caswell, who are the directors of the Flint Hills Writing Project and make this podcast happen every single day. Thank you to our magnificent designer, Kristen McGriff, and to Sonic Tonic Audio, who provided some of the intro and outro music that you hear today. See you next time, teachers.